And our last part with passé composé avec être. So we know a little bit about this already. It's our last piece to put together. But what verb have we found out that we almost always use with passé composé except for one verb that we started so far? Avoir, right? Almost every verb we've done, we take a form of avoir, add the past form of it. Except what's the one verb we know so far that you don't use avoir with to make the passé composé? Aller. Well, there's some other verbs that work exactly like aller. So that's what we're going to find out. Okay? So let's do an example. It's going to be just like we've been doing with aller. The verb monter. So what verb does aller use to make passé composé? Etre, right? Instead of avoir. Well, monter is another one that also uses etre, just like aller. So just like aller, we're going to have masculine forms, right? Je suis monté, tu es monté, il est monté. Why are these all masculine? Because we didn't add extra e's on the end of them, right? Nous sommes montés. Nous is plural, so we added an s. Vous êtes montés. Maybe the s if it's a plural group. I'm talking to you all, right? Ils sont montés. They all went up on the bus. Ils sont montés dans le bus. And then we had feminine forms, just like we had for aller. Je suis montée, tu es montée, elle est montée. These are all girls doing the action, so we added e's to the end. Nous sommes montés, vous êtes montés, elles sont montées. These are all plurals, so we added e's and s to make them feminine plural. So what's different with etre verbs compared to avoir verbs? We have to make them masculine, feminine, or plural, right? So we have a form of etre, and then we have the past form of the verb, and we have to think about making it masculine or feminine or plural. So let's start looking at all the other verbs that use etre in passé composé. So there's going to be a couple of different ways you can think about remembering these. One of them, this is kind of for people that like to memorize and have an acronym of letters. It's called Dr. Mrs. VANDERTRAMP. So each of these letters is the beginning of one of the verbs. Obviously, it's kind of hard to just memorize a random list, so over time you just have to get better at them. We are going to have a song in a minute too, but this at least helps you think about the first letter of them. So as we start to go, wait, does this verb use etre avoir? For example, jouer. What letter does jouer start with? A J. Is there any J here in Dr. Mrs. VANDERTRAMP? No. So we know that jouer can't use etre, it has to use avoir. Obviously, this letter thing won't work in every case because there's probably some verbs, right, that start with a D or an S that use avoir. But it can help sometimes. Like I said, jouer. There's no J, Dr. Mrs. VANDERTRAMP, so we know for sure that doesn't use etre. So let's look at these verbs. These are all verbs that use etre, not avoir in passé composé. Dr. Mrs. VANDERTRAMP. Devenir. And we're going to have to, some of these verbs we know already, some of them are brand new, so we got to start getting the meaning too, right? We can't just memorize forms and know what they mean so we can use them. Revenir. Mourir. Rentrer. Sortir. Venir. Arriver, naître, descendre, entrer, retourner, tomber, rester, aller, monter, partir, passer. Okay? And just so that in the far, far future, you're still studying French a long time from now and you find out something and you don't go, wait, my teacher lied to me back then. These almost always use etre. There are a few in here, we're not going to work on them this year, that sometimes can use avoir, but only in certain situations. So we're not going to work on those right now. Right now, any sentence I give you is going to be in the format that they use etre. Here's all of their past forms. Devenu, revenu, and venu. We're going to come back and say, what do those all have in common? Mourir, look how much it changes to a totally different word, mort. So it's like the irregular ones we did, like how we said that avoir changes to u. So this is one of those that just changes all the way. Devenir, revenir, and venir. What would we think those would end with? An I, right? Because they're IR verbs, but they're irregular and they just change to all the ones with venir in them have a u. Sortir. That's what we would expect. IR, it's got an I. Arriver. What do we expect with ER verbs? E accent aigu. E accent aigu. Arriver. Naître. Né. But there's another totally irregular one. The whole verb changes something different. We didn't just get to put a U on the end because it's RE. Ne. Descend. What do we expect from RE verbs? A U. We got it. Descendu. Bunch of the rest of these are all ER verbs, right? So they all end with E, accent aigu. Entrer, retourner, tomber, rester, aller, monter. Got another one with IR, so we got the I, parti, and then another ER, passe. Okay? And then we've got all of our meanings. Like I said, some of these are new, so we got to start practicing those, and we're going to have activities and projects that help us start getting those ideas. So let's point out again what we just talked about. Almost all of those are regular ER verbs, so they end with the accent aigu, except we saw sortir and partir. They work like regular IR verbs in passé, so they end with an I. Descend, RE verb, ends with a U like we would expect. Devenir, revenir, and venir are not regular IR verbs, so they actually end with a U instead. Devenu, revenu, venu. And then out of that list, there were two verbs that are totally irregular, that the word just turns to something else, and we just have to deal with it. Naître becomes né, and mourir becomes mort. And all of these verbs, right, because they use etre, what else do we have to remember about them? We have to add e's and s's to think about making them masculine, feminine, plural. And you just add it to the end of this. So if the verb is feminine and it ends with an E accent, we add another E. We don't put an accent on that E, we just add the E. If the verb is more and we need to make it feminine, we add an E. Not with an accent. The accent is only for when it's an ER verb and the ending, right? If you're adding an E to make it feminine, it's just an E, it never has an accent. Okay? So then we have the song. It's to a tune that you probably heard when you were a little kid, 10 Little Indians. And I have kids that are in French 4 and you can see them singing the song to themselves. If it helps you, great. Once you start learning French more and you're using it more, if you go to France or Quebec and you're immersed, it just starts coming naturally. But for right now, you guys are really good at memorizing song lyrics. You sing all the time. So if this helps, sing it, get it in your head. This is what you have to have. And then what is the point of the song? All the verbs in it, they're the same ones we just saw back here for Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp. They're all the verbs that use etre. So if the verb is here, you're going to use etre for passé composé. If the verb is not in this list, what are you going to use? Avoir. Let's listen to the song. It goes, Je suis arrivé, allé, venu, devenu, revenu, entré, rentré, descendu, retourné, resté, monté, parti, sorti, tombé, né, mort, et passé. Keep practicing this. Practice it every time, a couple times before you do a practice activity. Voila.